Hello, film fans. Welcome to the Film vs. Film podcast. My name is Martin Harries, your host, and I'm joined by the film encyclopedia man, Boaz Dix. We are a couple of filmmakers on occasion, but mainly can't stop yapping about movies. On this podcast, every episode we pick a topic from a film that's coming out at the cinema or on VOD. Myself and Boaz pick our favourite film from that topic, or team up against a guest and battle it out to decide which film will become the greatest film of all time. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Please enjoy part 2. Hello, welcome back to part 2. And of course, at the beginning of part 2, I go and look at what your Instagram responses were for the previous episode. And that previous episode was Coen Brothers Films 2. So we've got 2 Coen Brothers Films episodes now, which is great. And Was It That Bad Pod said No Country for their choice for Coen Brothers.
Oh, that's a great one.
Sam from One of Us is Bored said Hail Caesar.
Really?
Not a fan of that one?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I absolutely adore the Coen Brothers, but that was a misfire.
And the movie boners went with Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Yeah, we actually just covered that one this past summer. Which ones did y'all cover, by the way?
We did, the first episode was Miller's Crossing versus No Country for Old Men. No Country won that one. And literally our last episode was Oh Brother versus The Big Lebowski.
Oh, yeah.
And The Big Lebowski won that one.
Yeah, that's a hard one to fight.
Yeah. What would your choice be for Coen Brothers films?
Jesus. I really love Raising Arizona.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Big Lebowski is just so good. It's got to be Big Lebowski. Like, it really...
Yeah.
Although...
The dude.
No Country for Old Men is also so good. Yeah, and, even their worst ones, like...
Hail Caesar.
Like Hail Caesar, it's still like you're like, ugh, I mean they're so talented and so great, and it's just it's funny to like both of the Coen brothers and Frances McDormand and Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi all lived together at one point with Kathy Bates.
Oh really? Oh wow!
When they were all just like starting out, yeah, which is interesting because they've all been in each other's things except for Kathy Bates. So like, whoa, what's going on there? The Academy Award winning actress. And it's like, who was she I feel like she's the one that was always like, clean your goddamn dishes. And they're just tired. They're like, William Wynn would be around here. And then she's like, I can't work with them. That's all conjecture. I don't know that. I don't know that for a fact. I think they're all pleasant, delightful people, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably the inspiration for The Big Lebowski then it's probably themselves with Kathy Bates moaning at them. So my choice then for Rob Reiner films is The Princess Bride. I do love this one. I hadn't seen it for a while, so that was kind of really the basis of why I picked this one. I mean, what was it? A Few Good Men is a great one as well.
Yeah.
Again, another iconic scene. When Harry Met Sally, as I said, probably arguably the best rom-com there is, as well as The Apartment for me. You can't really get better than those two in that genre. And Stand By Me, I feel like, is a great kind of personal film for me as well. I had kind of 3 best friends growing up as well, so I kind of always kind of saw myself as like, who am I in our little group in this, Yeah,
I was always Jerry O'Connell for that. I was always a little bit fat, a little bit wimpy.
Yeah.
Do I have to be Jerry O'Connell? Yeah.
Yeah, that was probably me as well, to be honest.
Yeah, but now look at us. Now we both look just like him now.
Yeah. But I was very, very close to going with Misery. I do love that one.
God, Misery is fantastic. Kathy Bates.
Yeah. And my mum absolutely hates this film, Misery, just for one scene, and that's the hobbling scene. She hates it for that. A great little moment in that.
Yeah, Stephen King. We're actually right in the middle on our podcast. This October, if you haven't already had a chance to listen or you will want to, we're doing Stephen King all October long.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So we just did Carrie and Christine, because we've covered a lot of King already.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're hitting some of the ones that we haven't done. Pet Sematary, and I think Cujo.
Yeah, we've done a Stephen King episode. And obviously, we always ask our guests to pick first, and they went with The Shining. So it's like, well, that's pretty unbeatable. So let's think of something a bit different. So we went with The Mist. That's still a great one.
Yeah. Oddly enough, the only movies that Bryce really had ever seen before we started doing the podcast were Kubrick. Like he was like a guy who doesn't really like movies at all. Yeah, really like especially when we started, he didn't have time for anything, whether it was like action, comedy, or whatever. It was, or artsy, or like, it's not like he was like, oh, I'm only watching the best movies. But he's seen basically every Kubrick and really loved Kubrick. So The Shining was out for us. Doesn't fit the gimmick.
Oh, right. Yeah. So what happens in The Princess Bride? Well, a bedridden boy's grandfather reads him the story of a farm boy turned pirate who encounters numerous obstacles, enemies, and allies in his quest to be reunited with his true love, Buttercup. Very simple fantasy story. So first initial reactions to this one, Chase. What did you make of it?
I, surprise, kind of was raised on films. In a way, like, so I really love films. My dad's or he's not anymore. He retired, but he was a CPA, did people's taxes and everything. So the tax season he owned his own firm. So it was always like, I just didn't have a dad for like 6 months or 4 months when taxes was going on, but it would always happen over spring break. And my mom worked for him too. So we would go up to the office for that whole week while my friends were out, at the pool or whatever, doing spring break stuff. So we would be cooped up in the back room of the office watching movies. And it was always older movies that we could rent for like 50 cents because we had to rent, 10 of them for a day. And so like Princess Bride was definitely a huge impact on me because it's for that age, obviously, it's for, you're 6 to 10, but it's also like, 6 to a million. Like it's,
oh yeah. Plenty of stuff for adults.
Yeah, it's a perfect little. You can't not enjoy it.
Yeah,
it's so fun. It's like Star Wars. Like it's for kids, but it's not. It's so well made. It's just it's a perfect example of story writing. Like in improv classes and stuff, I'll teach how to tell a story. And if you break up the act structure, the 3-act structure, Princess Bride is a great one because most people have seen it, and you can go through and talk about the specific structures and the callbacks and things like that. It's tight. Yeah,
it's just a great example of a film we've kind of seen like a million times before, but they're just riffing on all these typical scenes that we've seen before and making it fun and different. And it's so witty and clever. Yeah, I really enjoy it as well. So directing then, I quite like the fight between Wesley and the ROUS, the rodent of unusual size. It starts in like a funny way where like the giant rat just jumps on Wesley after the joke. And I feel like you could easily make that fight look really stupid. But for me, at no point does it look like that. And I think it's just because it's cut really fast and it's not too long and there's no like lingering wide shots. Yeah, it still keeps its like funny charm to it because it's essentially a giant rat fighting Wesley. I think it's just interesting that we see like the giant rats before the fight too, because I think it just helps with like lowering the shock value of the rats like jumping on Wesley, because you could easily like just be laughing at Wesley and at the rat rather than being like surprised by them. So
yeah.
So I quite like that scene in terms of how delicate it was kind of handled, even though it does kind of look quite simple.
Well, and this whole film it's like something that people might dock points for, but it's actually brilliant. The rats are people in giant rat suits, right? Yeah. And like everything looks fake in that like storybook way. Like it really makes me feel like something that's almost completely died out is children's theater, right? Like live,
right? Yeah.
Like live shows, like done by adults, but for children, right? Part of that is the commercialism of like Broadway and everything now, but there used to be like you're here in Texas, at least it would be like for elementary school, you'd be going on a field trip to a theater, out in Houston or whatever that was doing Rapunzel, and it was this magic experience of live theater. And like, but the costuming is so like beautiful and clean, but none of it feels necessarily like worn in this real world. And it builds to this whole thing of we are in a storybook, and in a storybook, there isn't excess dirt around. Like in a storybook, everything, the sun is always shining unless it's important for there to be a storm, cause then it means something, right? The Sicilian with his like gorgeous clothes, but he's like gross pirate or, transient guy. Like, of course that would be worn up, but like, it's not, because it's a storybook, right? Like the Dread Pirate Roberts is like, his stuff is all neatly washed and, crest, like, because he looks the way that a hero would look, even with the tiny little mask, in the sword fight with Wesley and the Spaniard.
Montoya.
Yeah, Montoya. Like when they jump off the thing and grab onto that bar that's just there, and like it has the two spots where your hands perfectly go. You're like, yeah, that's fine, because that's what they're playing into the genre, like of that like childhood fantasy. It's not supposed to be realism, which I feel like a lot of film, I love realism. I want to be, taken away, and I want to feel like everything I'm looking at is 100% real, which is, harder and harder with CGI, but that's a whole nother fight. But this obsession with making everything look as though we are in that actual world, all the way down to the dirty, gross parts of it, kind of takes away from some of the magic, I mean, you don't go into a movie and say like, well, this is 100% real. Everything I'm looking at is 100% real. And if I am taken out of it for one moment, I'm going to call phony, right? Like you can't do that. You go into the movie theater knowing you're going to lie to yourself to enjoy it. So like if you're embracing that childhood wonderment, and the way that they present this film is done in that way. And I think that's a brilliant choice on the Reiner's direction. And one of the reasons that Goldman worked with him so closely to finally get this film made, because people have been trying to make it for years at that point. And not being able to figure out how to capture that magic, and it all the way to the setting, the framing narrative of the story, with just the grandfather reading his sick grandson, this story in this like old form, cause like even at the beginning, Fred Savage doesn't want to listen, and it's like, no, this is the way that stories are told, and it will always be this way. Now you try to tell a kid a story and they're like, no, I want my phone. It's like, put the phone away. You're going to love this.
Yeah. Rob Reiner definitely directs this in a way, as you say, is like, as if a child is imagining this, like how it should look in Fred Savage's mind. So you can get away with things like having all the costumes look super clean, because, well, that's how a child would imagine it in this type of story. Yeah. So I think Rob Reiner does a great job of like balancing these tones of like making it feel and look very childlike from a child's mind, from a child's perspective, making things look real clean and things. Whereas like you still got to have a little bit of a grounded quality, you still got to make it look kind of really impressive still. And I think Rob Reiner does that really well, has that balance there.
Yeah. I mean, and it would be such an easy thing to punt on, is like when you make something for kids, I'm sure there's a moment in your life that you can remember back, like the first time you didn't like a movie, like you were excited about seeing a movie, and then you walked out of the theater or whatever, and you're like, that was bad. I didn't know movies could be bad. You go back and you watch some of those movies that you watched as a kid, and you're like, oh, this is awful. Like I remember Never-Ending Story was one of my favorites as a kid. I watched it every day, like all the time, a go-to movie. And like we rewatched it for the podcast because Bryce, of course, had never seen it. And when we rewatched it, I was like, this movie is unwatchable. It makes no sense. Like the story, like the scenes do not connect in any sort of way. But as a kid, you have that wonderment, and you're just able to fill in the gaps because you want to be entertained. You want the story to work. So like that being said, that's why so much children's entertainment is not good, because they're talking down to their audience almost. And this like really doesn't. It makes you feel like you are the kid who's filling in the gaps without there being the gaps that need to be filled or anything, So.
I mean, you can definitely like see a lot of like the filmmaking here, like, you know, leading up to the rat sequence where you have like the puffs of flame. You know, they've clearly got like, you know, some flaming rigs there, but I feel like that is kind of just adds to the charm of this film anyway. So I feel like you can give a lot of that stuff a pass. Like even when Wesley is like climbing up the cliff on the rope and the others like hanging on Andre the Giant as they walk up.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't quite look right or feel right, but you kind of, again, because you're looking at this through a child's eyes, like it's fine, you know, even for adults. Yeah, I think it's great.
It's that fine, you know, we talked about fine lines, and you know, as much as I was saying like Reiner is not a in your face kind of director, he's a master of these like fine line things. And that whole, there's that fine line between like the reality of it and you know, the special effects of it. Right. And so like the fact that you kind of see where the gimmicks are going to come from, right? It also feels like it's real in that way, like not real in the sense of a story, but it feels like you're watching a live performance. Like, so like there's not real danger. It's safe. You know, like, as a kid, you know, if you get worried about something, like even when Peter Falk, like, is like, she doesn't die here. I just get worried. It's like, oh no, I'm into it. Right. Keep reading. Right. So like you feel that sense of danger of the fire exploding, but you know, everything's going to be all right because we're seeing it on a stage. It almost, you know, so there's that weird nuanced ability that he has to make you feel the way you do as a kid because of knowing the things are actually happening, but also in a contained way that's just for the story, you know?
Yeah. I think the only thing I would say that was disappointing was the end. Like it did feel a tad anticlimactic for me. Like I know they're intentionally like kind of like underplaying the scene where like Wesley can't move on the bed and he threatens and insults the king to surrender and he gets tied up. Yes, it's satisfying in a very witty way, but I feel like they've already done like a good action scene with like a sword fight between Wesley and Montoya. But there's plenty of like great wit in there too to drive that scene as well. So I would have preferred it if like those two scenes were like structurally kind of swapped around, because I always feel like your best action scenes, your best scenes should be at the start and definitely at the end. You know, there's plenty of like brilliant scenes in this film, but most of them for me are like in the first half of the film. So I would say that's my only like disappointment in the movie, but like that's a minor thing, I would say. Do you have that same feeling, or do you not mind it?
I mean, I see where you're coming from on that. I also feel like it's put in there in that direction because of like the journey that we've seen Wesley go on and what we know he's good at. Like the fact that he is this great fighter and is able to take down giants and swordsmen, you know, and all of the other stuff, but even the wit from the Sicilian, like he's using all of his attributes because he is smarter. So the fact that he's able to fake that confidence with the laying down, like he's using his other abilities beyond just being Superman, right? Just having
bluffing,
all that. Yeah. The bluffing aspect of it, like the piratey lies for the right reasons kind of thing. It just plays into that. Now it does become anticlimactic for that reason too, but it makes sense narratively, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But I feel like sometimes like you can make scenes better, you know, whereas like you can have like all of his aspects, all of his attributes all come together maybe in this climactic way at the end. Maybe, I don't know, but I that's just the way I feel with that scene.
Yeah, it's definitely not cinematic. Like you want that big, the high energy ending, like climactic fight cinematically, but you don't get it.
Hey, I'm James Lovino, and I'm here to tell you about Alternate Sides, a movie podcast with a twist. I've worked in the film business for 2 decades, but I haven't actually seen that many movies, and this has been driving my frequent collaborator, Sam, a self-confessed film snob, crazy. So every week, while he's stuck in his car trying to avoid getting a parking ticket, thanks to New York City's alternate side parking regulations, we discuss a classic film I've finally just gotten around to seeing. Alternate Sides, a new podcast about movies, parking, and a 25-year friendship, wherever you get your podcasts.
I would say my favorite scene though is definitely like the sword fight between like the Man in Black, Wesley, and Inigo Montoya. Like, firstly, it's just really well choreographed with like the sword play, and even like you have you get a sense they're just like tapping at each other's swords, not really doing anything. So you kind of have that as well for comic value. But I just love like the dialogue between them, like the gag where they both reveal that they're both not left-handed is great. Like the way Montoya like flicks his sword up in the air and like runs back to catch it is great.
Yeah.
You know, they probably dropped another one in shot so it was easier. I just like the simple direction to where we can see the actors doing everything, which I think is something that is still valued in action cinema today. So,
and that was really both of them. They learned to fence for this movie. It was the fight scene was choreographed by the same sword fighting choreographer for Return of the Jedi.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I mean it shows like it has that throwback to like the Errol Flynn 40s swashbuckler stuff, and it's it's all just basic stage combat. Real sword fights, you're not trying to hit the other guy's sword, you're trying to hit the other guy. It's fun.
Have you got a favorite scene then, or favorite shot?
I really love the Sicilian scene, the inconceivable, Wallace Shawn and him with the switching of the poisons, and then the spoiler alert, I just am immune to that poison and I knew I was going to kill you. Yeah. That's just a great scene. And then of course the Miracle Max. I love Billy Crystal and his trying to like write it off with the Tublave. Tublave is nothing. His wife comes in, Carol Kane, and she's like, it's true love, you asshole. Like, it's like their whole little chemistry together, and it brings like, we have these like big, sweeping shots of countrysides and everything, and now we're in this like tiny little cottage, and it's even a higher energy because of these two characters. Yeah. So I love that, and then the shooting of the way that they shot Andre, who was an insane, like just a giant, but the fact that they make him look even bigger, when they're pushing him on the wheelbarrow and everything like that, that whole scene is so well done.
Yeah, I was wondering at that moment, I was like, is he okay under all those flames? Surely it's not him in there. Score, Chase, what are you going for?
This is the score for
directing.
The directing? Yeah. I think I give it an 8.5. Yeah,
I think it's really impressive still from Rob Reiner. Again, and just having this balance between almost this kind of low budget feel, putting across a child's imagination with still keeping that kind of grounded quality, I think is really great here. It's got a great charm. That's what I would say. So I'll probably go like, the same. I think 8.5 is spot on. So screenplay then. I think what makes this film really fun is this whole narrative device where like the grandfather, Peter Falk, is reading to his grandson, Fred Savage, this fantasy book. But this is obviously nothing new in cinema. Like the opening with them is really short and you're like, is that it? Because you would normally like not come back to them until the end. But I loved it when like Fred Savage interrupts Peter Falk sometimes. And I loved it when like Buttercup dives off the boat and is about to get attacked by these screaming eels. And Peter Falk is the one that stops and explains that Buttercup doesn't die because he sees that his grandson is getting anxious. And to find his place again, Peter Falk like rereads the book, and we see like Wallace Shawn as Vizzini like say a line, but it's like Peter Falk's voice, and the whole eel scene is played out again until we see something new where like Andre the Giant like punches the eel and saves Buttercup. So I love the creativity in playing around with this narrative device.
Yeah, it's like you said, they're not reinventing the wheel or the or making a better mousetrap or whatever overused pun thing you want to use, but
no, they're playing with it.
It's done in such a pretty unique way, I think. It's not overused. They use it as a gag to like sort of break up the tension sometimes and sort of break up the monotony too. Like if this is a great like little fairy tale book, and to get if you are a young boy using standard gender roles or whatever, you're like Fred Savage, where it starts out and it's boring. And it's like this love story. And you're like, oh, this is not going to be one of those kissing books or whatever. And they break in saying that, like, just keep, like, hold your horses. Like, we're going to get to the fun stuff. And then, as we get into the film more and more, it peters out. No pun intended for Peter Falk.
Yeah, I really liked how, like, the chase is structured with, like, the Man in Black, Wesley, going after the princess, and how they're so creative as Wesley goes through each adversary. Like, I loved it in the sword fight with Montoya, that they're so, like, respectful to each other. Montoya lets the Man in Black rest for a bit before he's ready to fight after he's, like, climbed the cliff. It's naturally only sporting, of course. The way they each, like, reveal that they're both, like, right-handed is funny, and just, like, shifts expectations on who's going to win the fight, because you feel like Montoya is going to win by how he explains how skilled he is, and the fight with Andre the Giant again is really kind of respectful, as Andre wants to kill the Man in Black fairly with no tricks. So it's just hand-to-hand combat. Like, the fight itself is quite basic, but it's funny because Andre's like, I'm more used to fighting more than one person, not one opponent, and that's why he loses. I think that's just genius. Then against Vincini, you have, like, the whole which wine glass is poisoned, and Vincini goes through every possible scenario and even cheats and still dies, and the Man in Black is like, I built up immunity against this poison, so it didn't even matter about wit. He was always going to win. So I loved how they play on all these different situations that we've seen many times in other movies. So I think it's just really clever, and how they play on these stereotypical scenes.
Yeah, I mean, making the trope the star.
And again, I feel like this film has its own spin on every type of scene you can think of. Like, another one is their take on the dream sequence. Like, Buttercup is announced that she's about to be married to King Humperdinck, like Christopher Sarandon, and the grandson Fred Savage interrupts Peter Falk, saying there's no way Buttercup could marry this guy.
Yeah.
And Falk is like, can you let me finish reading, please? And we go back into the book and we see this old cranky woman berating Buttercup about, like, the marriage. Then, of course, Buttercup wakes up from a dream and Peter Falk is like, I told you so. So again, a great way of, like, utilizing this framing device of a character reading a story to a kid. So yeah, I feel like they're playing with every type of stereotypical scenario.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The cinematography in it is done in such a way that it, like, the dream sequence doesn't look like the rest of the fairy tale sequence, and it also doesn't look like the stuff with Falk and Savage. Like, there's a definite amount of, there's more realism in it too. In as detailed as everything is in the world of The Princess Bride, it still is that, children's story with a children's mind, right? Like, so it's not like there's a bunch of stuff everywhere, right? It's the sort of things that would be described. It's like, this is a castle, there's stone walls and tapestries or whatever, but then you look at Fred's, the boys' room, and it's like, he's got all his toys, and, it's very, covered in, it looks like my room, so, like, there's that sort of realism versus the fantasy thing that's really mirrored in that as well, which is a real nice touch.
Because I feel like, this is written in such a way that, you have this very, like, basic stereotypical story that we all kind of know with kings and queens and princesses and pirates and things. We all kind of have a basic understanding of that, and William Goldman is kind of playing off, like, your expectations of that, and how Fred Savage is like, hang on a sec, like, this isn't right. He has his own stories that has influenced the character, like, because of what you see in his room,
Yeah.
So I feel like, when there are interruptions in the story and we go back to those characters, I feel like it is kind of warranted, because this character of Fred Savage isn't as aware of these type of stories as the audience is. That's kind of how, like, for me, how it works so well, how they kind of are able to, like, play with these scenes.
Savage is the audience surrogate for this film.
Yeah.
Right? We are experiencing the story through him, like through his mind being told the story as well, right? So it's even set up that way in film theory. They talk about how like the character that you are the most connected to is a character that is introduced off screen, because you're looking at film as like a window or a mirror that you're not reflected in. So if you're looking at it that way, you're a third person looking in. So any voice that you hear off screen would be one that you're connected to first. And this movie even starts with no, like, Princess Bride comes up, then there's no sound except for Fred Savage coughing. So like immediately you're in his mind, right? Like we're now connected to this character. And it's sort of like that way of hinting at like, you're going to see this story through this character. So this is you, and being able to pull us out of the story and back into him is sort of that way of reminding us, like, don't get too caught up in all the this, that, or the other. Get caught up in the story the way he is, right? This is supposed to be fun. Let it be fun.
I feel like my only negative with the script is that Inigo Montoya goes missing for like half an hour, or roughly. Like the scenes with like Buttercup and Wesley are really compelling still, but I feel like they set up this great character in Inigo Montoya in this brilliant like sword fight. Then he just comes back for the last half an hour, but I would have just preferred a few more scenes with Montoya just from a selfish point of view, because he's just such a great character. But that's just me being very selfish. I want more of him.
I mean, from the very beginning, and it's interesting because our heroes are, obviously Wesley, but when you meet Wesley again for the first, like the time after he's disappeared, he's the bad guy. He's the Dread Pirate Roberts, and you quote unquote don't know that it's him. And then you want him to die because you don't want him taking the princess, but the people who are fighting him are the people who have kidnapped the princess. Yeah, but like you also don't want them to lose, because you're kind of like,
these guys are cool.
I love this Indigo guy. Yeah, and who doesn't love Andre the Giant? I mean, he's in real life, superhero.
So in the beginning of this story, you've got like kind of a lot of bad guys.
Yeah, it's all bad guys
that we start off with, even though it's kind of very obvious that the farm boy is, behind the man in black. So I don't think that's an issue either in this story, that it's kind of obvious that it is him as well. It didn't take anything away from me at all, knowing that it's obvious that it's him.
Yeah, no, they don't. They're not trying to hide it.
No, no.
Like it takes Buttercup way too long to figure that out.
But even that's not really a criticism of the film, that Buttercup doesn't know who this person is, because that's what you kind of expect in this type of story anyway.
Yeah.
Because again, Fred Savage is imagining this story in his head, kind of thing. So.
Yeah, I mean, and if people had a problem with somebody not telling that somebody's obviously someone else in disguise, Shakespeare would have never had a career. Like every one of his things is like, hey, this is a girl who's going to dress up like a boy in this scene to fool her own parents. Like,
it doesn't matter. Yeah. So funny, interesting lines. Then again, this is another one where there's quite a few, like, and I think this is where like this really is where it's for the adult audiences as well. Like it's so witty. Like Cary Elwes, the man in black, is climbing the cliff on the rope, and Inigo Montoya asks him, "Slow going?" Look, I don't mean to be rude, but this is not as easy as it looks, so I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't distract me. It's a great one. Then later in that same scene, he's like, "I've got some rope up here, but I don't think you would expect my help, since I'm only waiting around to kill you. That does put a dampener on our relationship."
And like, again, that's right where you start to like really fall in love with the characters, including Inigo, where you're like, nah, this guy can't lose either. Like, I don't want either one of these guys to lose, because like obviously he's our hero, and then Inigo has to go down, and when he knocks him over the head, he just says, it would be shame to kill an artist like you, or whatever. It would be like putting a rock through a great stained glass window or whatever.
You don't by any chance have 6 fingers on your right hand? Do you always begin conversations this way? Wesley, what about the ROUSs? Rodents of unusual size? I don't think they exist.
Oh man, my favorite line in this movie is life is pain. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something.
Yeah. I feel like that's the most like real life kind of real world line in there. Not very fantastical at all. One from The King, Humperdinck, where he's talking to Tyrone. He says, Tyrone, you know how much I love watching you work, but I've got my country's 500th anniversary to plan, my wedding to arrange, my wife to murder, and Gilda to frame for it. I'm swamped. Well, it just happens that your friend here is only mostly dead. There's a big difference between mostly dead and all dead. From Billy Crystal. And one of my favorites is from Billy Crystal. His wife says, you know, but after what you just said, I'm not even sure I want to be dead anymore. You've never had it so good. It's so brilliant. And then, oh god, I think he's in Spinal Tap as well. But like the minister that's marrying them, you know, it definitely goes into like Monty Python mode, where he's like, marriage is what brings us together. It's just a great laugh out loud moment there.
That's about the only American thing that he ever did is Peter. It'll come to me, but he was like a big British comedian from the 60s and 70s. But yeah, that's like his most famous thing is saying marriage funny in A Princess Bride.
But of course, my favorite is probably the most famous line in the movie is from Montoya, where he says, "Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die."
Yeah, that's God. I have one of those shirts. It's got the name tag that says "Hello, my name is," and it's just Inigo Montoya.
Ah, nice.
My father prepared to die. Yeah,
that's awesome. So, screenplay, score, Chase. What are you going for?
Like, you know, by the book, this is a solid screenplay. There's not really anything. It's you know, you can't cut anything. There's nothing extra. There's nothing that pulls you out of what the story needs to be. It's super entertaining. There's all those quotable lines. It's very and they're all very poignant. That's one of the reasons that they've become so culturally significant. So, I mean, I got to give it an 8.3.
8.3? Okay. Yeah, I really like this one as well. Like, yes, maybe you could argue that, you know, a lot of the best scenes are in the first half of the movie. But I wouldn't say it like tails off or anything. It still keeps a fairly really great, consistent level of quality in the writing. But it's just really witty. I really enjoy like really clever writing in a funny way. It definitely feels like there is a very kind of British humor here, which I kind of appreciate a lot. Obviously being British.
Yeah.
So I do really like that. I think sometimes with movies, they can be too witty for me to be truly like timeless. So, but I think this does, you know, this has a great balance and I think it's just so clever and how they play with all these scenes that we've seen a million times before in other movies and just aren't that clever with it compared to this one. So I really like it. So I'm going to go like a 9.3, I think.
All right.
Acting then. I really liked Robin Wright as Princess Buttercup in this movie. Like she's almost like the straightest character here in terms of performance, which works really well against like Carrie Elwes. And I like the scene in the fire swamp and Wesley's like, it's not that bad. And then Robin Wright is like looking at him like, are you kidding me? And then he says, well, I'm not saying I'd like to build a summer house home here, but the trees are actually quite lovely. And again, she's like, seriously? So yeah, I think Robin Wright is certainly the one that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily talk about that much when you talk Princess Bride, but I think she has a very specific role here that kind of isn't your typical like princess figure either, you know, when she has this kind of quite straight performance for great comic effect, whereas normally in films like this, the princess character is very, you know, princess-like. They don't have a lot of character to them, frankly, and but even so, like she still has quite a good feminine quality to her. You know, I'm just thinking about like Shrek for some reason, and like you have Princess Fiona, and like she is in a very similar role, but she's kind of more like kick-ass as well. You can always like the easiest route to like make these like princess type roles, you know, the damsel in distress roles, is to make them really kick-ass, whereas sometimes that's kind of a bit boring now. So I kind of like how they kind of still have that balance there, but she's still really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, she's a damsel in distress, but it's not even really that much distress. Like she does try to get out anytime she can. It doesn't matter who has her. You know, she's trying to get away, and it's always it's never like unfairly taken away from her. It is usually just like, I mean, she just isn't as big as a giant who can just grab her, you know. She's not you know, she's not somebody who can swim faster than a bunch of deadly eels, you know. So it's just, you know, she's even if she is capable, it's like, well, yeah, she's going to need some help along the way, but she's not useless either. No. Or, you know, the other like turning it on its head kind of thing where like she would be like some awful snooty princess, right? That like, so she's still a strong-willed person.
She's not whining all the time.
Yeah. It's not, but she's not just there waiting to be rescued, because, and part of that is in her mind, it doesn't matter if she's rescued or not. She's got a death sentence. You know, she doesn't want to marry Humperdinck. She wants to marry the love of her life, Wesley, who is dead until, you know, she comes back. And then it's no longer damsel in distress. It's let's fix my life now.
I loved Mandy Patinkin as Inigo Montoya. Like all the performances in this are quite like heightened, as you would expect in a film like this, and Mandy Patinkin is no different. But near the end, when he's fighting like the six-fingered man, Count Tyrone Rugen, played by Christopher Guest, and when he's like repeating the famous line, you know, "Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die." He brings like an extra level of emotion and passion into the scene to make the scene like extra special, I would say, and memorable for me. In a film that's quite witty and goofy at times, this could feel kind of out of place, but I think it's just pitched perfectly here without messing up like the overall tone of the movie. And I think, you know, the film needs some kind of like some emotional weight here as well with that storyline, especially because you've kind of got the love story element, which is great. You know, we've seen a lot of that stuff before, but with this kind of revenge thing here as well is kind of nice that you've got two things that have kind of great emotional weight to them, especially with this character in Montoya. And you can really feel it. I can anyway, when he's saying those lines, and it's just a really iconic scene. And talking about like action expectations and how you like structure your movies, I would feel like it would lose something if it's like super choreographed, that fight between those two. You can really feel like the emotion and the passion coming through from Mandy, and you know, if it was like super choreographed, you're going to lose a lot of that. So
yeah, I mean, we had the choreographed fight, right? Like that's the fun swashbuckling fight at the beginning. This is the emotional story arc coming to an end for Patinkin's character, for for Inigo Montoya, and like it needs to be more intimate in that way, and it really is. You know, Mandy Patinkin is just incredible in everything he's in. He's a national treasure of ours for Broadway and stage, but he's also has a huge career on film. So just a fantastic actor, so good, and really really pulls three dimensions into this little storybook character. You know,
absolutely, yeah. Because I mean, a lot of this film, they're kind of, as we've been saying, they're playing off like all these tropes and how can we play with them, and a lot of that you're getting humor from it. And I mean, is there going to be room for this type of story, this type of emotion? And I think it just brings kind of great balance here. Like it's not all just about the funny stuff. There's some really great heart here, I would say, as well, especially in this character.
Yeah, and it really goes to his performance. There's stories all over the place, but specifically, I saw one not too long ago that was he's on TikTok a lot. His son makes these funny TikToks with him, just asking him questions or whatever. But there was this story where of this girl who was reaching out to him because her father died of cancer when she was very, very young. And she like found this film and his performance in it, like inspiring and helped her continue because like her 6-figure man was cancer that like, killed her father. And so, it's been a thing for her and like it helps her move on. And it's just this connection that he's been able to make through generations of kids and things that are going through these trials and things that, are hard for adults to process. Yeah. But a kid being able to see something like this and get something so emotionally deep out of it, that can help them through such a time is so important. And it's because he like took the care to really act in this little thing. I mean, it doesn't sound like that much, but it's huge to somebody,
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. I think Carrie Elwes is great as this kind of like posh swashbuckling hero. I loved his like physical humor as well. Like after he's been revived from being slightly dead, the scenes where like Fezzik is holding up his head and Carrie Elwes just flops his head back and forth. And when he, let's go, like it's always funny to me. Like I love the little like scene where they put out their hands and together just before they go into the castle and Carrie's like moves his shoulders back and forth to like fling his arm around.
Yeah.
Is great. Like I always feel like that type of acting, that this physical acting is deceptively difficult to be convincing. Oh yeah. And I think he does a great job. And even when like Andre the Giant is like carrying him through the castle, I think he's just great there of just positioning his body to make it seem like he can't move any of his limbs, even though he's kind of walking anyway a little bit. But I think he's just got this very great like British pompous over the top hero qualities of him that they play off brilliantly.
Yeah, I mean he basically does the same thing when a few years later in Robin Hood Men in Tights. Like it's the parody of this is just using him doing it again.
Yeah.
I love Peter Falk. I grew up on Columbo movies.
Yeah.
So it's fun to see him. He's playing the grandpa. He's just doing, understands the assignment, gets it done.
Yeah.
Chris Sarandon is excellent as Humperdinck. You hate him just from his smug face,
Yeah. Yeah. I love Fright Night. He's great in Fright Night.
Oh yeah. Oh, he's the voice of Jack Skellington too.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, he's the speaking voice. Danny Elfman does the singing, but yeah, he's the speaking voice for Jack Skellington. Wallace Shawn, excellent, and then Andre the Giant. He was super nervous to do this because he's not an actor and he barely speaks English. He's got that thick French accent. And it was one of those things that he was like not going to be able to do it because he had some.
Didn't he have a back injury or something?
Well, yeah, he was in the WWF at the time, and he was going to go to Japan, and they weren't going to be able to buy him out of the contract for that. But then that got canceled because he hurt his back so bad. And by this point in his life, he was kind of coming towards the end of it because his gigantism or whatever it's called that made him so big was out of check, and he was always in pain. But he had blown his back out, so they had to do a lot of wire erasing for when he's carrying people around because he just couldn't do it even with that giant size. But yeah, everybody loved him. He also talked about being on set. He loved it because everybody just treated him like a member of the cast. Like nobody stared at him as this freak that he always felt like people were staring at him because he's this giant. But in this, he's just an actor, and all actors are a little bit of a freak. So like it worked, nobody's when you're all weird, nobody's staring at the weird one. But yeah, he's so great in it.
Yeah, I mean, he's not the greatest actor in the world. Like you could argue he may be the weakest performer in here, but I didn't feel like I was distracted because he was really bad. I think he still does a great job. Yeah, I think he's great.
Yeah, I mean, he does exactly what he's supposed to do, which is be really, really tall. It should be huge. I know that at one point they were trying to, when they couldn't get him, they were looking at Schwarzenegger.
That would not work.
Yeah. Well, and by the time they got around to it, he was a huge movie star now. Like when they were first looking at it, it was unknown, and then it was Terminator, and everything blew up. So it was like, well, we can't afford him.
Anyone want a peanut?
I think we could actually understand Andre better than Schwarzenegger at that time.
Yeah, definitely.
He might have had to dub it in.
So favorite performance for you, Chase? Who are you going for?
I want to say Billy Crystal because he's so funny, and Carol. But it's such a duo with him and Carol Kane. But I really got to give it to Patinkin to bring as much it's not a one note performance at all in such a part that could be the one note. I mean, he's the Han Solo. He's the friend. He's the there's nothing there for him, but he has this big emotional story arc that really resonates. And when people think about this movie, that is typically one of the first things that you think about, if not the first. I mean, you think about Inigo, my name is Inigo Montoya before you think about As You Wish.
Yeah.
Which is like the theme of the movie, so.
That should be the more iconic line because it's the most important one, but it's not, Yeah, it's hard. I think they're all really, really good. Like, I really like Cary Elwes, as I've said, as this he's just got a great, like, British charm in his humor. That really appeals to me. But again, Mandy Patinkin is the choice for me. It's just really iconic, and he brings a lot of great added emotion and passion in that last scene, which really elevates this whole film, frankly. So I'll go with him as well. Acting score, Chase, what are you going for The Princess Bride?
There's, I mean, it's everybody's doing what they're supposed to. Mandy is definitely one who goes above and beyond in his performance. I feel like, Carol Kane and Billy Crystal also do more than they need to in a very good way. But for the most part, it's pretty by the book. And I think, nobody's bad at all, really. You said, maybe Andre the Giant is a little bit lost in it, but partially because he just doesn't really speak that much English in the first place.
No.
But I think that, I give it like an 8.3.
Nice. Yeah, I think I'll go like a solid 8. I don't think there's anything like particularly special other than Mandy Patinkin. I think for me, definitely the strongest element by far is the screenplay and the directing. So yeah, I think 8 is fair. Yeah. Right, let's add up the scores then for The Princess Bride. The Princess Bride gets 50.9. So this is Spinal Tap got 54.7, which beats out The Princess Bride with 50.9. So my losing streak continues. Maybe I should just go first for picking the movies. I don't know.
Yeah. Don't let the guest pick.
Maybe I should just break my own rule to get me out of this streak. So next episode as Killers of the Flower Moon is out in the cinemas and will soon be on Apple TV Plus as well, I believe. And of course, we can only focus on one man for this movie, and that man is Martin Scorsese. So we'll be having a look at his movies, and we'll have guests for that one as well from the Movie Boners. Chase, you have been amazing on the podcast. Thank you ever so much for coming on. I do appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. This has been super fun. I love talking movies.
This is your opportunity again to tell us about your podcast and where can we find you?
Yeah, so my podcast is also about movies. It's called The Movie Gap. We fill those gaps that people have of movies that they have not seen. Typically really, really big movies or cult hit movies or whatever. It all comes from my co-host who has basically seen no movies. Now he has seen at least 230 because that's how many episodes we have. But, there's always one that pops up. It's like, wow, we still haven't covered that one. But, every once in a while, because we've gone so far, we fill a gap of mine here and there, but, or one of the guests. So it's always super fun. We make a lot of jokes. We talk a lot about movies, and I'm usually trying to convince him that everything is good, even when he hates it. So you can find us anywhere on, anywhere you stream podcasts or download podcasts. Just look for at the Movie Gap on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the social medias, or check us out on crossthestreamsmedia.com. And you click on the Movie Gap and all of our episodes and videos and everything are there. So check us out. Let us know what you think. So
cool. Right, guys, it's time to say goodbye. It's goodbye from Chase. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And it's goodbye from me. I'm going to figure out what my child life would have been like if it were a stuffed animal. Bye-bye. That's it for part 2. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Check out part 1 if you haven't done so already. But don't stop there. Get involved and tell us what your favourite films are relating to the episodes. Send us a DM or comment on Instagram and TikTok at Film vs. Film Podcast, for Twitter at FVF_podcast. If you do, we'll give you a shout out on the next episode. If you're feeling really generous, you can buy us a one-off coffee at our Buy Me a Coffee account. Remember, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Pod signing off. Thank you.